Thank you guys for showing up. It's the last thing of the day, so I know it's hard. I know we all want to go back and maybe grab another coffee or something, or sit on a cafe, but this presentation, I think, is going to be really insightful for the legal needs of Web3 that we kind of need to address as questions. The title is Staking Modern Building Materials for Contracts. A bit more broadly, maybe even, it's smart contracts as modern building materials. So basically the agenda looks like this. We're going to go through the general innovations of blockchain. We're going to talk through kind of the movement of the modernists for architecture and move kind of into how this all kind of comes together with some examples for how good things can be in the context of modern contracts as bolstered by smart contract modules. And then one of my personal favorite concepts from my days in the law, one of my mentors gifted me this idea of the contract life cycle, which is pretty fascinating. But the general thread of the whole thing is the unification of three concepts: law, architecture, and blockchain. So a lot of you, when you first got exposed to crypto, probably got exposed to the Austrian economists too. One of the more prolific ones, of course, was F.A. Hayek. And in one of his later talks, when he was getting on in years, he talked about these three paradigms that led to spontaneous and emergent order in society: law, language, and money. We've been focused largely on the money aspect for a long time. I think we're all aware of that. DeFi has been the order of the day, just to make sure that we have enough infrastructure to give Wall Street and the bankers what they need to bring their money with them. But we haven't really been moving into the other paradigms as much. Language has always been kind of open source, unless you're French. They have a government institution dedicated to preserving the Frenchness of the French language. But regardless of whether it's open source or the French style, it's not free from consequences. The paradigm of law is something that's kind of worked well enough, but I think that we can do better. We've already been proving that we can figure out some pretty cool stuff on the finance front with DeFi. To kind of work ourselves back into the paradigm of architecture, for use as a good metaphor for what I'm about to talk about, I don't know how familiar you guys are with architecture itself from the physical standpoint, but the Industrial Revolution kind of gave rise to a new way of how we live, how we engage with each other, how our cities are planned, and et cetera. It all kind of arose from these new materials that we could now build for a lot cheaper and in much more massive quantities, and resulted in materials that ultimately were much stronger than anything that had ever come before. This led to new engineering materials, or new engineering methods, that led to things like rail travel, skyscrapers, and block housing. It kind of led to this emergent philosophy called form follows function. There's really a lot less ornamentation when it comes to modernist buildings, because the beauty of the structure is in the fact that it is better than what we've been used to using for the past however many millennia. This kind of application of this philosophy took on many different forms. You had a lot of different people that had different ideas about how a building should act, how a building should look, and how it should all come together. There's this idea that as a result of these new innovations, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, humans can be more connected with themselves, with each other, and with nature, which is surprising given how some of these modern buildings look. But the idea is to kind of break down some of the traditional norms that buildings had carried with them over the ensuing thousands of years. This kind of led to the idea of democratizing these new manners of building buildings, and potentially making it a way for people to get along better across broader society as it is. So what I have here is probably one of my favorite examples of what modernism kind of is. It's from a favorite Wes Anderson film, The French Dispatch, which is kind of appropriate given the setting here.
One way to tell if a modern artist actually knows what he's doing is to get him to paint you a horse or a flower, or a sinking battleship, or
something that's actually supposed to look like the thing that it's actually supposed to look like. Can he do it? Look at this. Drawn in 45 seconds right in front of me with a burnt matchstick.
Perfect, Sparrow. That's excellent. May I keep it?
Don't be stupid. Of course not. The point is, he could paint this beautifully if he wanted. But he thinks this is better. I think I sort of agree with him.
Sorry if you guys couldn't hear that. I don't think that we have speaker coverage, but that's kind of the idea. It's like, yes, he can do what has always been done before, but can we do better? It's kind of this idea of competence meets vision. The people that became the master modernists were masters of the classical method of architecture. They studied under the greats, they internalized all of their messages, but they saw this new thing coming out of the Industrial Revolution and they thought, well, do we need to do it the way we've always done? And from that, experimentation arose. They pushed the boundaries of what was possible. You had buildings that were going up, for the first time greater than 10 stories tall, or building roads that could last longer and carry hundreds of tons of things across the whole country. So this combination about creativity along with competence leads to this idea of modernism. And once it becomes proliferated enough, people start to see, hey, I like the potential of that. Can you do something like that for me? It becomes open source. People start working within that new paradigm, and experimentation kind of takes off. And I don't know, it's the beginning of a new paradigm. So one of the leaders, of course, that a lot of people know is Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. He kind of championed the international style. His idea was kind of, in part, summed up by this quote of his: "No design is possible until the materials with which you design are completely understood." He valued competence. He was also a very big master of symmetry. Le Corbusier is a controversial figure. He kind of ascribed to the same idea, but he, like many of the greats, was kind of full of himself. He actually had this idea that we could make Paris better by incorporating modern brutalist architecture. He wanted to raise the whole city to the ground and start over. Luckily, he didn't get his way. Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, is probably the most famous of these outside of architectural circles. His big thing was alignment with nature. You had his style, which was understanding how humans could be more in touch with nature and, frankly, spreading out a lot. You had these new modern materials that allowed people to not have to be squeezed in quite so tightly just for the sake of structural integrity, and you could have overlapping planes of existence that served different purposes and allowed people to, in his eyes, be more true to their true selves. And in kind of example of that, there's this really nice GIF here that I really like. It's kind of the change that Frank Lloyd Wright saw, and I believe that industrialization was as much a revolution for architecture as the blockchain revolution will be for contracts. Now, how can we apply these lessons? The value of architecture kind of summed up, and I'm not an architect, so bear with me. People build structures so that they can build value for themselves and their community for a reliably certain period of time. Nothing lasts forever, and that's factored into to a build, from what I understand. It's one of the oldest sciences and one of the second oldest professions. But it kind of gets to this idea that civilization arose from humans not only having the means by which they can take care of each other and spend enough time in shelter to be able to heal their wounds. That was kind of the first architectural evidence of society arising. But also, in a kind of an agricultural sense, when people started building structures that served the purposes of humanity better than those they found in nature. Like, is your hut going to be better than a cave? I think that the answer to that question led to your first kind of value accrual over time, over a reliably certain period of time. In the same way, of course, agriculture allowed civilization to scale too. Now, the value of blockchain to me can be summed up very simply. It's democratized access, contribution, and control of reliably secure data. We've used it to update the paradigm of money, which used to be intrinsically tethered to sovereign military enforcement. Now we've married it to mathematical principles, which are independent, about as independent as you can get. The question now is, why do we need law if we have the marriage of mathematics with things like smart contracts, something truly independent? Well, law, in kind of a similar way to architecture, it provides a relationship structure for a reliably certain period of time. Law also provides context and reliability to the subjective aspects that can't be written down in code. Smart contracts are unfortunately named, in my opinion. They're logical systems. If X, then Y. You can build whole ecosystems out of that same paradigm. But systems of law provide that context that only humanity can bring. It's the whole reason we provide value to the systems we create, is the subjective aspect of humanity. Logic is a tool, but humanity brings the value. So to synthesize, like a blockchain, a contract is a closed system representing a relationship between parties, but they're based on human language rather than code. It's necessary because of the subjectivity I just laid out. You can't really code in human rights, in my opinion, or creditors or beneficiaries. They can be anticipated, but the nature of these relationships is pretty nebulous at times. It's the reason why common law is so evolutionary over time, but still reliable, because it takes certain pieces from certain things that relate to each other, but it narrows them down into a common thread of understanding. And through this kind of understanding that society shares and is enforced by the court systems, you can actually rely on it to build mutual value between parties for a reliably specific period of time. So we're kind of, to understand how we could improve traditional contracts, it's helpful to give a few examples. One of the big ones that comes to my mind is escrow accounts. This is just a mechanism by which, if there is an issue about ownership or ultimate ownership about assets, it's important to make sure the assets stay safe for whoever the rightful owner ends up becoming. Loan agreements are another good example. This is kind of the same idea, but you're not actually changing ownership of the ultimate value of the principal. You're just reciting the right to the loan principal plus interest, or the right to the value of the assets if anything should happen to them if you can't get them back. Trust accounts were kind of another great example that I think that has a lot of application here today. It's a vehicle that allows the separation of management from ownership of assets in a non-commercial setting. It can be commercial, but it's frowned upon. It places control in the hands of a trusted fiduciary manager, known as a trustee, who is bound by legally enforceable duties to maintain the assets in the best interests of the owners, who are known as beneficiaries. These are commonly known as fiduciary duties, duty not to waste the assets, duty to invest properly, diversify. There's a bunch of these different things. But these two can be simplified based upon agreements between the beneficiaries and the trustees, or the ultimate trustor. The way these can be improved, we could make these smart as a module mechanism. So for escrow accounts, what you could do in the sense of a pending outcome of a case or a pending transaction, you could add these assets to an escrow account that pending the outcome of a case, you could have those assets continue to earn rewards by locking them into a liquid staked contract module. That way, whoever ends up on top doesn't have to deal with the added cost of having assets that aren't doing anything during the time that happens. Loan agreements, I think we've talked about before. It's kind of one of the key pieces of DeFi that is being built out right now by things like Mars protocol. You have event-based logic that could be independently verified by an ombudsman or something. But as we saw with Celsius, the people that are secured by smart contract skip ahead of the line, no matter what's written down in the law. It ultimately results in a primary creditor situation, despite whatever is written down. Trust accounts are another innovation that I think could be really important. A lot of DAOs currently wrap themselves in LLCs. This is problematic because it kind of undermines the idea of anonymity for members, which a lot of them value, but you also need leadership. And without leadership, nothing really gets done. But you get around this by wrapping a DAO, let's say, in a trust. This way you can nominate or delegate management to a trustee who is known, who is KYC'd, and who is able to engage in business relationships on behalf of the DAO while still implementing the wishes of the DAO members. You could even make the arrangement contingent upon the trustee only acting as directed by the members of the DAO. So to kind of bring it back to the last bit of the message of my talk, this is a really helpful way of understanding how relationships between parties work. One of my mentors from my days as an Iowa lawyer, Nicholas Critelli, he's not only an Iowa lawyer, but he's also a licensed barrister, really sharp guy. He shared this concept with me. It's based off of the 5 stages of grief from Kubler-Ross on Death and Dying in 1969. You're probably used to the conventional understanding of first denial, then anger, then bargaining, depression, and acceptance as you're encountering your own death. He inversed it for the concept of a relationship between 2 parties. The initial stage of acceptance is where both parties agree that a relationship has commenced and the terms are satisfactory to everybody. There's a meeting of the minds. Now we can start to create value with each other. As time goes on, the relationship may not reflect the desires of each party. Someone may feel like they're not getting their values worth, but the terms haven't changed, but they feel as though this problem will solve itself if they just keep quiet and hope things work out on their own. Next stage, if this doesn't work out, they end up at the bargaining table again. They start asking, well, can you do this for me? This really needs to get done. I need more widgets next month. And they're like, sorry, I can't do it. This is a really key juncture. If resolution is not reached at this stage, then it's unlikely that the relationship will recover, because the next stages are anger. People, when they feel like they're getting screwed out of a good deal or a deal that they used to have that they really liked, they will start to behave emotionally, and they will try to sabotage the relationship to try to get the other person to leave first. But after a certain point, denial kicks in, and one or both of the parties will just throw up their hands and say, I'm done. I don't care what the penalty is, which in a lot of cases, as set forth in the contracts, can be pretty substantial, but it doesn't matter. They want to move on. So as projects are being built, what we really need to be conscious of is what this relationship life cycle looks like for users. And it kind of relates to architecture in the sense that architects really do think about how long they want a building to last when they're building it. Bitcoin and Ethereum, they have basically been set up to last forever. Bitcoin has had a bit of an estimate attached to it. I think they were going to stop having or switch to a fee structure by 2140. But they kept things very simple. Ethereum's a primitives platform for smart contracts and a means of exchanging value. Bitcoin's even more so. Platforms have to be a little bit more flexible, but they also have to have different ways of accommodating different desires and different features, which could be different types of tokens. And even regulatory enforcement is a new thing that has to be anticipated too, especially as more tokens are deemed securities, good or bad. The big thing that I think will really take off things for the end user are kind of tailored modules that can be plugged into legal relationships and legal agreements to bolster the set of the whole. So if you want to look at the Industrial Revolution as kind of the new materials that gave rise out of that Industrial Revolution included things like steel beams. They made buildings more structurally sound. They increased the space available. They just made buildings more efficient and, frankly, cooler. The same could be said here. You could replace certain key provisions of a legal contract and make the contract more efficient and still have the flexibility needed for when things don't go as planned. So It's my desire that we take these lessons and hopefully we get lawyers on board with building out blockchain and Web3. And hopefully you guys enjoyed my talk. Feel free to follow me on Twitter or Medium. And keep an eye out for the accompanying article I'm going to put out soon. So thank you.